Are you a living person or are you legally classified as a maritime vessel? I know, it sounds like an absolutely absurd question, right? But according to a highly intricate alternative legal and architectural theory, the systems that govern our modern world treat you not as a flesh and blood human, but literally as commercial cargo that's been lost at sea. The source material we're exploring today centers entirely around this one incredibly provocative premise. The natural man is converted into a legal vessel, the straw man, for the purpose of maritime commerce. Basically, this worldview claims that governments, banks, and our legal systems operate entirely under a hidden maritime law, secretly trading our identities as corporate assets. It is a wild concept. Okay, let's dive into this. Today, we're acting as impartial guides, neutrally deconstructing this dense, really fascinating architectural theory to understand exactly why its adherents believe our everyday reality, from our bank accounts to our birth certificates, is actually a carefully managed commercial matrix. We're going to look at the exact texts, the historical laws, and the technological blueprints that they believe prove this entire framework. Now, the source text treats this whole framework almost like layered software architecture. We'll start with layer 1, the linguistic root exploit. Then we'll move on to maritime law on land, unpack the strawman illusion, examine the exact protocol for reclaiming the estate, and finally, we'll wrap up with what the text calls the sovereign cockpit. So, layer 1, the linguistic root exploit, how language was weaponized. The source argues that this matrix doesn't actually begin in a courtroom. Nope. It begins at the very root of human language. And this brilliantly illustrates the theory's starting point. Notice the linguistic shift happening here. Back in Old English, the word for a physical location was pronounced there, but the Norse word for ownership or possession was pronounced there. Over centuries, these two distinct words completely merged in pronunciation. The source argues that this linguistic collision created a massive subconscious bias in the English language. Suddenly, physical space and personal property became practically identical in our minds, essentially wiring our grammar for ownership and territorial control, rather than, say, natural sharing. Tracing the timeline laid out in the source material, things got even more complicated in 1066 AD. The Norman conquest replaced the everyday spoken land language of the commoners with a highly formalized legal French used exclusively in the courts. This created a huge linguistic gap. It forced the common man to hire attorneys just to translate for them. By the time the printing press came along and froze English spelling in the 1400s, the word was no longer just a simple tool for communication. According to the text, it had become an exclusive weapon for deeding property and locking down contracts. This brings us perfectly to Layer 2, Maritime Law on Land, the 1666 break and the Law of the Sea. This is where the theory claims that governments deliberately brought the laws of international shipping right onto dry land. Now, the absolute linchpin of this theory is the Cestui-Que-Vie Act. This was passed in 1666 after the Great Plague and the Fire of London left thousands of people missing. To manage all that abandoned property, the law created a trust. The rule was if a person was missing beyond the seas for 7 years, they were legally presumed dead. Well, the source argues that this specific law is still secretly active today, meaning the state assumes every single newly registered citizen is basically dead at sea. This allows the government to conveniently step in as the trustee, legally controlling your assets because, on paper anyway, you're a ghost. Now, what's really interesting here is the deliberate vocabulary parallels the text draws between maritime shipping and human biology. Just think about it. Under Admiralty law, a ship arrives at a dock and clears the birth canal, spelled B-E-R-T-H. Over in the hospital, a child exits the mother's birth canal, spelled B-I-R-T-H. The ship files a certificate of manifest. The child gets a birth certificate. The theory asserts that these are absolutely not coincidences. Instead, it's a deliberate linguistic framing designed to treat humans as floating commercial property. Which leads us right into Layer 3. The straw man illusion, the corporate persona versus the living soul. Here, the text introduces a highly specific legal vocabulary, sometimes called SPIGO, to differentiate the biological human from the state's corporate fiction. According to the theory's interpretation of Black's Law Dictionary, a natural man is exactly what it sounds like, your flesh and blood. But the straw man or legal person, that's a corporate entity. It's a legal fiction created by statutory law. Think about this. The next time you look at your passport, your driver's license, or a court summons, notice the all-caps font. The theory heavily emphasizes that the state is not addressing you, the living soul, but rather this artificial corporate vessel they created just to collect debts and axes. The source breaks down the birth certificate specifically to prove this point. When a parent signs as the informant, the theory argues they are legally providing data to an authority and effectively waiving their ultimate parental authority. Furthermore, the very act of registration historically means surrendering your legal title to the sovereign. And because the document carries crown copyright, the state legally owns that all-caps persona it just created. So in this worldview, your birth certificate isn't an identity document at all. It's literally a property receipt owned by the crown. So you might be wondering, how does one possibly escape a system like this? Well, that's layer 4, reclaiming the estate, stepping off the wharf and onto the land. The source actually provides a literal step-by-step escape manual for adherents to reclaim their sovereignty. And the protocol is heavily structured. Step 1 is filing a notice of standing, which is officially declaring that you are the living man, not the corporate fiction. Step 2 is an affidavit of truth. Remember that 1666 Act? This step uses it to literally prove you are alive, so the title of your estate is legally handed back to you. Finally, Step 3 is rescinding consent. This means refusing what they call joinder. Basically, you refuse to connect yourself to that all-caps corporate name, officially stepping off the maritime ship once and for all. So the crucial point is that this isn't just theory for the adherents. They use this daily against what they term scavenger ships, debt collectors and utility companies. Instead of getting into arguments, they use a clever technique called conditional acceptance. They say, sure, I accept your financial claim, but only upon strict proof that a valid wet ink contract exists with the living natural man rather than the corporate straw man. Since debt collectors buy bundled, digitized debt, they almost always lack this wet ink proof, which supposedly nullifies the entire claim. Finally, we reach layer 5, the sovereign cockpit, bypassing the biological matrix. The text takes a really fascinating turn right here, linking this entire legal containment grid to modern technology and even human biology. The source basically views our current reality like a corrupted computer. It describes it as an entropic sink running a corporate operating system that constantly bombards us with static and drains our vital energy. The proposed solution? What they call negentropy. This is essentially running an antivirus spiral program to inject precise geometric order into our lives and restore our natural cellular batteries. Let's see how this builds into their final technological leap. To break out of the standard operating system, which they refer to as the two-bar cage, the theory outlines building actual physical audio hardware. By pulsing highly specific geometric sound frequencies, like a 174 Hz tone, it claims to literally tune the human body, unlocking dormant or junk DNA and allowing you to step completely outside the programmed loop. It merges hardware coding with bioelectric resonance, using mathematical constants, like the number 9, as an invisible observer to entirely bypass the system. It's an incredibly complex, multi-layered architecture, isn't it? It merges etymology, maritime law, constitutional history, and bioelectric physics into one unified theory of control and escape. It completely reframes every single bill you pay, every document you sign, and every device you use. So, based on the fascinating framework we've unpacked today, will you remain a compliant subject within the two-bar cage, or will you step out onto the common land?